Hello on a beautiful day. It's good to see you again. It's nice outside, but I'm here because I love your company and I just want to be around you as much as I possibly can. Anyway, okay, today we're going to talk about lipids. And you hear a lot about lipids, but we're basically going to introduce lipids today. And then once we introduce the players here today with it, later on, when we get into heart disease, we'll put them into play and show how they relate to heart disease and also in cancer and things like that. But our role today is, just to introduce you to the structure of lipids, and I'm sure you've heard about them before, and you may have had some chemistry and that, and you've learned about them, but we're going to reintroduce them, so it may be review, but add a little nutrition touch to them that you may not have heard about. But first, because of popular demand, I can't tell you how many emails I have received saying, please, please, put these on again. And so here we go, Oregon towns. All right, so let's go to number 17 and see if you can figure out what town that is. I'll give you just a few seconds. Ready? North Bend. Yeah, it looks kind of like that, doesn't it? All right, 18 should be a gimme. Think south of Portland. So you're pointing at the seaside. Okay, number 19. Give you a few minutes. Why am I giving you a few minutes? Because I have no clue what that one is. I have no idea. The answer was not on the sheet. So if you know what that is, yeah, whatever. Anyway, 20, this here is something you would put a key into, and it seems to be falling, so that would be Cascade Locks. Yeah. How about 25 down there? That should be a gimme. That one's south of Portland. Sorry. I know Seaside's not south of Portland. Anyway, number 25, south of Portland. Salem. 26 is probably over where none of you have ever been. Or if some of you have been there, you don't go there very often, or most people don't make it there because they don't get past Multnomah Falls and go east. That would be, and if you're a Trekkie, then you would know that's Enterprise. You ought to go to Enterprise sometime. Beautiful over there. 27. So that's a sun up there and a toilet. And so, again, some of you may not even know it exists or never been there, but it's John Day. And the last one, it's close to Portland. And that should be a gimme. Canby. All right. So those of you that were thirsting for this Oregon town thing, you got your taste today. We may have some later on. But, yeah. Anyway. So lipids, triglycerides. I'm sure you've heard about these. These are the things that over the winter, when you try on your bathing suit for summer in the spring, over winter you have done a great job of harvesting these and storing them. Some people store them and they lump over the belt, and some of them store them and they stick out from the hips. So these are the triglycerides. Glycerol and fatty acids. There's the glycerol is the backbone here, and then you have 3 fatty acids coming off, which is why it's a triglyceride, kind of like a tricycle with 3 wheels. Huh, didn't know that, huh? Bicycle means 2 wheels. Huh, go figure. So anyway, we have a triglyceride that is a glycerol and 3 fatty acids. Now, what distinguishes one triglyceride from another is actually the fatty acids that are on there, because the glycerol never changes. It's always the 3-carbon backbone. But what's going to make a difference, and it's going to make a difference not only in their name, but whether they're liquid at room temperature, whether they're solid at room temperature, whether they may be heart-friendly or not heart-friendly, is all going to depend on the fatty acids. So let's look at that. Fatty acids come in different lengths, short, medium, and long. They're always in even numbers. If you've had any chemistry at all, you remember the Krebs cycle and glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, all that. If you remember, we go from glucose to pyruvate, then to acetyl-CoA, and then the Krebs cycle. But you only go into the Krebs cycle if you need to make ATP. You only need it if you need energy. So if you're sitting on your rear end and just, aerobic and breathing, you don't need to make that much energy. So all the carbohydrates and things that you eat are going to turn into fat, and they're going to go, to acetyl-CoA first, so you go from glucose, glycogen or starch, and you're going to eat that. You go to glucose, and then you go to pyruvate, and then you go to acetyl-CoA inside the mitochondria. If you don't need to make energy, those 2 carbons are going to be used to make a fatty acid. And so you'll always see fatty acids in even numbers. There's starting with 4, so 4, 6, all the way up to 24 carbons, but never 11s or 13s or anything like that. So, and whenever fats are utilized for energy, they're broken off in 2 carbon units because they go to acetyl-CoA inside the mitochondria. So that's why you should exercise aerobically if you want to burn fat, kind of thing. But anyway, so fatty acids can be classified as short, medium, and long. When we get into digestion, we'll talk about short and medium, how easy they are to digest, whereas long is a little bit harder to digest. But most of our foods are going to contain long-chain fatty acids as part of the triglycerides. All triglycerides contain a mixture of different lengths of fatty acids. So the triglyceride doesn't have to have all long or all medium or all short. There can be 1 long one and a medium and short one. There could be 2 short ones and a long one, 2 short ones and a medium. It's just the chain length of the triglyceride is going to be based on what percentage is long, what percentage is medium and short. But the triglycerides are different. One of the things that makes them different is because of the length of the chains and what percentage of the length of the chains. You probably have heard of saturated fatty acids. So these are fatty acids that are not going to have any double bonds. And the reason it's called saturated is because they are going to be saturated with hydrogens. And if you're saturated with hydrogens, you can see there's no place where you could add a hydrogen unless you do this acid group, which is basically going to be the ester group that matches up and bonds to the glycerol. There's no place to put another hydrogen. So it's totally saturated with hydrogens. It doesn't have any double bonds. And so they're referred to them as saturated fatty acids. Again, these saturated fatty acids can be different lengths. And so the 2 things that determine what kind of fatty acid it is and what its characteristics are, liquid at room temperature, solid at room temperature, whether it's good or bad, in some cases would be its length and its saturation. You find saturated fats in animals and tropical oils. The tropical oils would be coconut oil, cocoa oil, and palm seed oil. And saturated fat, as we'll see in heart disease, are considered kind of the bad guys, but not really, because you do have shorter chained fatty acids that aren't considered to be as bad as the longer chained ones. The animal fats are the bad guys because they are the longer chain fatty acids. Tropical oils tend to be shorter, or in actuality medium chained kind of fatty acids. So they're not considered as bad as they used to think that they are. But anyway, we'll talk more about saturated fats when we get into heart disease. Monounsaturated, well, mono means one. So that means there's going to be one double bond or one area where you're missing hydrogens. And so the unsaturated means you're missing those hydrogens. But if you remember from chemistry, carbon needs to have 4 bonds because it has 4 electrons in its outer energy level. It needs 4 more to be complete. So it has to have 4 bonds and share 4 electrons. So it's sharing 2 with these hydrogens and 2 with another carbon. So that gives it its 4 bonds. But that creates then a double bond within the fatty acid. And so that's a mono, one unsaturated. You find a lot of those in olive oils, canola oils, things like that. Monounsaturates are considered heart friendly. Now they still have 9 calories per gram, so you can still gain weight and get fat by eating too many. But if you're looking at heart issue and its relationship to heart disease, monounsaturated fats are considered heart friendly. So that's why there's such a push to use olive oils, canola oils, peanut oils, all the nuts, and that's again why one of the things are walnuts are good, or almonds or something, is because the fatty acids are considered to be heart friendly kind of thing. The polyunsaturates, now we have 2 different kinds of polyunsaturates. Poly means many, so you're going to have many unsaturation points here. And so obviously then you'd have multiple double bonds in the chain. In this case here, we have 3 double bonds. Here we have 2 double bonds. And you probably have heard of omega-3 versus omega-6. Omega-3 linolenic acid, I will need you to know the difference between those. And really it's kind of close because the only difference is you have an N in the omega-3 and you don't have one in the omega-6. But these are considered essential fatty acids, meaning that we have to get them from our food. And we just can't get them otherwise. We can't make them. But if we get these, then we're in good shape. Omega-3s you hear a lot with heart disease and things like that we need to increase our omega-3s. The reason it's called an omega-3 is because if you look at this end, the left-hand end, which is the methyl group, and you count in 1, 2, 3, the 3rd carbon is where you get your first double bond. And then if you look at omega-6, you count in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here is your first double bond. So really the naming comes from where it's the first double bond after the methyl end. Okay, so this is the acid end, this is the methyl end, so you count in from the methyl end, and if it's 3 or 6, that's what it is. Okay. So the differences are omega-3s, the linolenic, you get a lot from soybean and canola oils. But you may have heard of omega-3s in relationship to fish oil. And fish oil has EPA and DHA, and I'm just putting these structures up so you can see they're very similar. But these numbers mean it has 18 carbons long. This is 20, and this is 20. And this means it has 5 double bonds, and this means it's omega-3, and this is 6 double bonds omega-3. This is 3 double bonds omega-3, but this is 18 long, 20 long. EPA and DHA are very important for health, and they're considered important that we need to eat those. You can convert linolenic acid into EPA and DHA in your body, but it's kind of inefficient. But you may have heard getting eating flax seeds and things like that have some omega-3s in them, and so they are good. But the conversion, you lose some in the conversion, so it's better to eat fish, that kind of thing. If you just can't stand fish, You can take fish oil pills. They do not recommend you taking more than about 1 gram um, of fish oils, and so because it can thin your blood, we'll talk about that later. But EPA and DHA, you need to, though, if you're going to use a fish oil, you really need to check the label, because there are some fish oil pills that do not have a lot of EPA and DHA in them, and people just buy them because it says fish oil. But look on the back of the container and make sure the DHA and EPA add up to 1 gram. So it'd usually be like 500 milligrams or 300 milligrams or 800 milligrams or something like that, but they need to add up to 1 gram. I wouldn't recommend going over that because it can thin your blood, and you can, kind of like, especially if you're on Coumadin, they kind of ask you to be careful. You'd really want to check with your doctor if they would want you to take fish oil, because Coumadin is going to thin your blood, plus the fish oil is going to thin your blood, and so it may be too thin. So make sure you check with your doctor on that. But if you have no other problems and you just can't eat fish a couple times a day, that kind of thing, then fish oil pills would be another option. Omega-6 you find in a lot of vegetable and seed oils. Omega-6 recommendations kind of getting up and down. Back 10 years ago, they recommended not taking in omega-6s because they could increase some risks of heart disease. They're kind of calming down on that. But they are better than saturated. But omega-3s and the unsaturated fatty acids are the recommended. If you're going to use oils in cooking or in foods and you eat those, they would recommend the monounsaturated first, and then EPA and DHA fish next. I don't think I'd cook with it, but to get it in your diet, and then the linoleic, the canola, and soybean oils, and those kinds of things with that. And then not recommend so much the corn oils or safflower oils or those kinds of oils that would be more omega-6 related. I just wanted you to see the list of omega-3 fatty acids in seafoods. Normally what they recommend is to eat fish that have color to them. I mean, a darker color, like salmon has the dark orange, tuna is kind of a darker meat type of thing. And as you can see, as you get down to more and more lighter colored fish, the cod and haddock, they don't really have a lot of omega-3s. So really it goes back to what we've kind of talked about before with vegetables, is to eat to color. And the same thing with fish. The darker the color of the fish meat, the better, and the more omega-3s, because they're fattier. Let's just put it that way. Go from there. But I just wanted you to put that up there so you knew on that. I mean, it's not bad to eat cod, but it's better if you can eat tuna or something. So, here's anchovies. So next time you go get a pizza, get an anchovy pizza. Okay. Not only will you get omega-3s, but it will cause you to drink a lot because it's so salty. I don't know if you've ever had an anchovy pizza, but they are really salty. And yeah, I had one once, and yeah, it was not tasty. But anyway, some people like them, so obviously because they sell them. Anyway, we're going to talk a lot about oxidation as we go through heart disease and stuff. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about that and introduce it to you, so that when we get into heart disease and also cancer and a lot of other things, we are going to really harp on oxidation, because that's kind of one of the key things in nutrition now is oxidation, antioxidants, those kinds of things. So I want to introduce you to it and make sure you're comfortable with what oxidation is, so that when we relate it to diet and disease, then you'll be comfortable with it. But oxidation and rancidity are not really actually the same, but for our purposes, we can think of them the same. It's like when you leave potato chips up on the refrigerator and you forget about them, and they've been opened, and you come back 3 months later and you say, ooh, potato chips, I think I'll have one, and it just tastes a little off, a little musty kind of a thing. That's because the oils on the potato chips have gone through oxidation because of increased oxygen and so forth. And they've changed. They've become oxidized, and they don't taste the same. It's the same thing as some foods you might see that are canned or whatever, in a jar, and you can see the top of the food, and it's kind of browned, turn a little bit brownish. That's oxidation also. It's one of the reasons they put in antioxidants like vitamin E or something, or C, in foods, is not necessary for the nutrition, but as an antioxidant to prevent it from browning or turning, getting rancid and not tasting as good. But oxidation basically is number one, you need an unsaturated fatty acid. Saturated fatty acids will not oxidize because you need a double bond. The double bond makes it a little bit weaker bond and makes it easier for oxygen to incorporate and become free radicals, which you need in order to get that oxidation. So you need to start with a monounsaturated or a polyunsaturated fatty acid. And obviously a polyunsaturated would be more susceptible because it has more double bonds to be oxidized. So foods that are high in polyunsaturates, you'd be careful with you're not using them very quickly, because if they're sitting on your shelf, they're going to oxidize. But the key is that we're going to take that unsaturated fatty acid, we're going to create a free radical, you're going to combine with oxygen and eventually form what's called a hydroperoxide, which we would call complete oxidation or rancid. This one would start tasting bad or looking bad. What initiates it is exposure to heat. If there's free radicals around, obviously you need oxygen, those kinds of things, or time. I mean, you could say over time things are just going to happen, they just degrade. And how do you prevent it? Well, you're going to use an antioxidant that actually is able to donate electron to stop free radicals from working. Okay, and so we'll explain free radicals here in a bit. But here's the scenario, is that we start with this double bond, so you need a double bond. And then you are going to go through some process, heating or whatever, that is going to cause you to lose a hydrogen and create an unstable electron conformation. You're going to be missing an electron, which, if you've had some chemistry, you know that energy levels like to be full. If they're not full, they will seek to become full. And so they become what's called reactive. And this is going to be searching for something that will give it an electron. Okay, and so what can give it an electron is oxygen. And so what you'll notice is that this oxygen is going to bind to the free radical area and create a peroxide, but you still have the free radical. You see the little dot there. You still have that free radical. Okay, I think I had some points here. Anyway, so what's going to happen then is this free radical that's on the peroxide is going to steal an electron from this other fatty acid and become a hydroperoxide. So this has enough reactive ability that it can actually steal this hydrogen and its electron and create this hydroperoxide. But then what this fatty acid ends up with is this conformation, which was exactly what we had up here. So what you can visualize is that we're at this same starting place. We're going to just go and just, it's going to be a cyclic thing. It just keeps going and going and going until basically everything is oxidized. And that's when your potato chips would taste a little musty, or the color would change, because it will just continue as your food's sitting on your shelf. And, like corn oils and stuff like that, they will go rancid if you leave them in the cupboard for a long, long time. They will just keep reacting and reacting and just keep going and going and going. I mean, they do recommend putting oils in the refrigerator, but they do get kind of solid a little bit. But it does reduce rancidity because it's going to slow down the reaction of the electrons and slow them down so you don't have as much reaction. But that's where we're, the idea is that this can happen inside your body also. It can not only happen to food, but it can happen inside your body. If you've had any biology at all, you'll know that our plasma membranes are made of phospholipids. And those lipids, some of the fatty acids on those phospholipids are going to be unsaturated. So they can become oxidized inside of your body. And they can be damaged in such a way that the membrane becomes less of a barrier, which increases the risk of cancer and some other issues that we'll talk about later. So that's kind of where we're heading. So I hope this is kind of a beginning introduction to oxidation, but let's just go forth and just kind of clarify some of the things that we talked about. This is the big picture, but let's just look at free radicals for a minute. Again, a free radical, if you haven't had any chemistry, is that when the energy levels of an atom need to be full. So sometimes they will share electrons with, and we call that making a covalent bond. Sometimes they will become an ion, either losing an electron or gaining an electron to become complete, so that their energy levels are full of electrons, and so they're happy, kind of a thing. But a free radical is when you have an atom that is not complete, and it's missing. It doesn't have a pair of electrons is missing one, and so it becomes highly reactive. And like we were just mentioning, it can set off a chain reaction that will continue to oxidize. And what they're relating here is in the plasma membrane, this can happen. So what we'll talk about when we get into heart disease is you can eat foods that have free radicals, and then those free radicals will be reactive inside your body. On a normal basis, the mitochondria will produce free radicals. Or we can breathe in free radicals. Smokers breathe in free radicals. You might have heard that smokers need to have more antioxidants. Well, they're breathing in free radicals by burning the smoke. If you remember, we said that what creates free radical or oxidation is high heat. Well, if you're burning the tobacco and you're breathing in the smoke, that smoke contains free radicals. If you live in a polluted area, the air is going to be full of free radicals. And our body creates free radicals all the time. But where we're heading is that nutrition can help that, because we will talk about phytochemicals that are antioxidants and some different kind of antioxidants that you should include in your diet so that you can offset these free radicals. So free radicals are like robbers. They will attack energy from other cells, basically satisfy. So basically what that means is they're going to steal electrons from something else and cause it to become oxidized. That's what it's going to happen. I was just kind of mentioning some, but what can cause free radicals? Ultraviolet light, normal metabolism by the mitochondria, inflammation, air pollution, smoking, radiation, just all kinds of things can cause free radicals. But our body is such, and the food that we eat and some of our immune system is built, if we get the right foods and the right antioxidants, is meant to overcome those, and we can neutralize those. But if we're not eating right, or we're not, if we're doing a lot of things like smoking or doing things that would create free radicals, then that's going to become a health problem. You might also hear, and we will talk about something called reactive oxygen species. very similar to a free radical, but all free radicals don't have to be oxygen. I mean, you can have a free radical that deals with iron, and it can be, highly reactive. But if it's a reactive oxygen species, it can be a reactive molecule or a free radical, but it's going to deal with oxygen. And so I just give some examples here of these aren't, hydrogen peroxide is not a radical and hypochlorite isn't. But here, whenever you see this little dot, that is a missing electron. It means it doesn't have a shared electron. And so these are going to act just like free radicals. These will be highly oxidating. As you know, if you've ever poured hydrogen peroxide on a wound, it will all foam up and everything's very high in oxidation. So anyway, reactive oxygen species is similar to a free radical, but it can be different. It always contains oxygen in the molecule or ion or whatever. And then these just show that, wherever you see ROS, reactive oxygen species, they can cause scavenging, they can damage. You go down here, I don't know how much you know about telomeres, but they're part of genetics, and they can damage those. We can damage DNA, we can damage mitochondria. So reactive oxygen species, it fits into that oxidation picture with free radicals and stuff that is kind of a big deal as far as nutrition is concerned. And the problem is that people aren't eating right to get the antioxidants that would help prevent this. This is what I was kind of talking about earlier, where free radicals and reactive oxygen species can actually attack the plasma membrane and make it less of a barrier. So you can see there's some spacing in here that's caused by the membrane damage, which can reduce its barrier properties for carcinogens or other things that might get in there. But we're especially concerned with carcinogens. But it is going to break down our plasma membranes, which is not a good thing. So anyway, we'll get more and more into this when we get to heart disease and cancer and things like that. And this just shows that they can also damage neurons. So you can damage DNA and neurons. So you can affect your nervous system by oxidation and things like that. Okay. So how do we prevent that? Antioxidants. Antioxidants are structures that can actually give up an electron to a free radical and make it complete without becoming free radical itself. So it can kind of regenerate itself. So antioxidants would stop the progression of free radicals. Again, that's why they would put antioxidants in food products, so to prevent that oxidation. Or that's why we should be getting antioxidants in our bodies, so we can prevent and neutralize those free radicals and reactive oxygen species that maybe we eat or we create as a normal everyday part of metabolism. Antioxidants is, I just put this up here because vitamin C is an antioxidant, vitamin E is an antioxidant. The difference is, when you read in your book, we don't talk too much about vitamins specifically, but when you read in your book and you do some of the quizzes on there, you'll find that vitamin C is a water-soluble vitamin. So what you would find is that vitamin C would work as an antioxidant in your blood system or interstitial fluid. Wherever there's watery fluid, then vitamin C would be there as an antioxidant. Then you would find that vitamin E is lipid soluble or fat soluble, so it's actually going to be working in your plasma membranes as an antioxidant. And then here's some other ones: lutein, lycopene, beta carotene. They're all going to be helping in preventing oxidation of your plasma membranes. You hear a lot about lutein for macro degeneration in your eyes and things like that, because it is going to help reduce oxidation of the membranes there. So anyway, these are some examples of some antioxidants that would help reduce the effects of free radicals, reactive oxygen species, or in essence would be able to give up an electron and make the free radical, make them complete in their energy levels so that they would be neutralized. But then the vitamins E and stuff, they don't become free radicals themselves or reactive oxygen species, and so you tend to neutralize the whole metabolic process there. And so where do we get antioxidants? Most of them we're going to get from plants. Here I keep harping on plants. There's, as far as we know, now it could come up later down the road that that's not true, but as far as we know, there's not a lot of antioxidants in meat or meat products. It comes from plants, what we're going to call later phytochemicals or plant chemicals, and that is lycopene that I just showed you in the previous slide. Is you find those a lot in tomatoes, so they're from a tomato. They're not really a nutrient, even though you might hear them called phytonutrients. They're phytochemicals that are antioxidants. They neutralize free radicals. But again, another reason to get more plants in your diet. Okay. You've probably heard of hydrogenation. Maybe if you read any labels, you'll see things like partially hydrogenated or hydrogenated kind of thing. And basically what that means, it deals with the fatty acid again, but it's just what the word says. It's hydrogenation basically means you're adding a hydrogen to the structure. If you remember, saturated fats are full of hydrogen, so obviously you wouldn't hydrogenate saturated fatty acids. You would have to have an unsaturated fatty acid in order to add a hydrogen because they're missing the hydrogens. So you're going to be adding hydrogen to an unsaturated fatty acid and basically making it more saturated. You can have totally saturated fats. So basically what you're going to be doing is taking an oil, because monounsaturates and polyunsaturated fatty acids are going to be liquid at room temperature. Saturated fats are going to be solid at room, triglycerides that have a lot of saturated fats are going to be solid at room temperature. Example would be the fat on meat. We said that meats have a lot of, or animal fats have a lot of saturated fats in them. And so they tend to be solid at room temperature, chicken fat, beef fat, things like that. Whereas foods that have a lot of monounsaturates, like olive oil, oils would tend to be liquid at room temperature. And then corn oil, which is polyunsaturated, canola oil, polyunsaturated, tend to be liquid at room temperature. So unsaturated fatty acids tend to make things more liquid at room temperature. So what you're going to be doing is you're basically taking an oil and you're adding hydrogens to it to make it more saturated so that it becomes more like it's saturated fat and becomes more solid. What the concern is health-wise is when you don't completely hydrogenate something and you leave it a monounsaturated fatty acid. You take a polyunsaturated, you add hydrogens by hydrogenation, and you eliminate some of the double bonds down to the point where you get monounsaturates. And the problem with that is that it's a man-made product. You do see some trans fatty acids in milk, dairy, that kind of thing, but they're natural. But the ones that you see in most food products are going to be man-made because hydrogenation is done in a big factory where they use a lot of catalysts and things to force those hydrogens back in there. And you're going to create a structure that is not normal in high abundance in nature, and that's called a trans fatty acid. If you look to the right here, you can see that in most monounsaturates in nature, so the ones you would find in olive oil and canola and those kind of nuts and things like that, are in what's called the cis form, and you can see that the two hydrogens here are on the same side of the structure, and so it makes kind of a V-shaped structure here. A trans fatty acid, you notice that a hydrogen they're on opposite sides. So you've created a structure that's a lot different. It's still monounsaturated because it has one double bond, but it is not the same structural component because it's more straight, and so very similar to a saturated fatty acid, because saturated fatty acids are very straight. So trans fatty acids and saturated fatty acids can cause some of the same problems health-wise. We said that saturated are kind of the bad guys. Well, trans and saturated are kind of in the same ballpark as far as increasing risk of heart disease, of possible cancers, and different things like that. You don't really see a recommendation for how much trans fatty acids we can get in our diet, because a lot of times we don't really know. But they do recommend less than 1% of your calories. But it would be very difficult to monitor that, because you do have some on the label, but it's not really a good indicator, as we'll see in a minute here. But you don't, and just to be honest, most of hydrogenated monounsaturates are going to be from processed foods, right? So pre-prepared foods and that kind of thing. So let's look at where we might be able to find those. Again, it's just a picture of, you can see that here's a saturated fat, here's a trans fat, both straight. Here's a normal unsaturated fatty acid. So it's going to have a kink in it. And so you can see where saturated and trans would kind of be very similar as far as your body is concerned. When you look on a food label, if you see anything that says hydrogenated, there is going to be trans fatty acids in them. So make sure you check your label. And when you read an ingredient list, I don't think we went into this when we did the food label, but when you read an ingredient list, the list is based on weight. Okay, so the listing as they go through is how much of that product, how much of that ingredient is in the product by weight. And so usually the top 3 ingredients are the most, and after that they get really, really small. But you can see hydrogenated, and then you can see partially hydrogenated. Whenever you see partially hydrogenated, that means it's monounsaturated. Hydrogenated basically means it's totally saturated. So they have added hydrogens to make it a saturated fat, which you can see this is like Crisco, which is shortening, and so Crisco is very hard, so they would make it as hydrogenous as they could to get it as hard as possible. And why would they do that? Well, why would they make something that is not good for your health? Well, basically, it's really not the company's fault. It's the consumer's fault, because way back when, I have no idea when they started making Crisco and those kind of things, shortening. But when they stopped using fat, animal fat for cooking foods and that kind of thing, lard and whatnot, people wanted to use form of vegetable based as opposed to animal based. Then they said, well, so they demanded, well, can't you make it something out of plants, because we don't want to use the animal fat. But the problem, we can use oil, yeah, but it becomes oxidized and becomes rancid. So can you give us something that's not rancid? And so what the food scientists came up with is, sure, we can hydrogenate a plant oil, and we can make it so that it's kind of like lard, so that it will stay on the shelf for a long time without becoming oxidated. And then you can, when you heat it up, it will become oil-like. And behold, it actually makes a flakier crust and all kinds of different things that cooks like. And then, only recently, in nutritional time, if you will, we found out there was a health problem. Because so the food companies are kind of in a, in between a rock and a hard place, if you will, because cooks and bakers and things are wanting something that won't spoil and is last on the shelf, but makes things flakier, that kind of thing. But then the public is wanting the same thing. They want a flakier crust, but they don't want something that's going to affect their health. So it's kind of hard. But so you kind of can't blame the food companies, because it was by demand from consumers that they made this, and now people are kind of used to it. But the long story short is that if you see hydrogenated, it's going to be totally saturated. If you see partially, it's going to be a monounsaturated. And they can saturate or monounsaturated, or partially hydrogenate as much as they want, depending on the consistency they want of their product. Because margarine has a lot of partially hydrogenated, because what they did is they hydrogenated enough to get it to stay solid at room temperature but still be spreadable. Crisco's not that spreadable, so it's more hydrogenated. So you can go from really hard hydrogenated to oil, and then anywhere in between, depending on the consistency that you want. You just hydrogenate as much as you want, say, oh, that's the consistency we want, so let's quit right there. So deep fat fried foods, if you've ever worked in a fast food restaurant, you know that they don't really put oil in the deep fat fryers. It's usually kind of a solid block of something, or very, very thick hydrogenated oils that are there. So when you're eating French fries and things like that, then you are eating hydrogenated oils. But also, and they're usually monounsaturated, so they're partially hydrogenated, because they are kind of thick and pourable, but also because you have that double bond, you are exposing it to high heat, so there's also that risk of oxidation. Okay, especially if you get French fries, because they're going to soak up the oil. Especially if you get French fries that are at the end of just before they change the oil, that oil is going to be really oxidized. So if you get French fries that are basically when they first change the oil, probably not a lot of oxidation. Still get trans fatty acids because they are hydrogenated, but not so much. But if you get at the end, you're going to have both partially hydrogenated trans, and you're going to get oxidation. So not a good thing, kind of a deal. You can see here, I've just listed how much trans fatty acids that you would have. And you can see any of the hard margarines are going to be highly hydrogenated. They're going to have the most. And things that you would use lard in, or not lard, like Crisco or shortening or something like that, or the frying oils, then those are the ones that are going to be have the most trans fatty acids. So the goal would be to reduce any of these that you would be eating. Again, the key here is on the food label you will see trans fatty acids, but the labeling laws say that if you have less than 0.5 grams of trans fatty acids in your food, you can say that it is trans fatty acid free. It's just a labeling law thing. So they do not have to declare any trans fatty acids if they're below 0.5 grams. But if you look on the label and you see partially hydrogenated oil, you know that they have trans fats in there. So it may be only 0.4 grams, but they're in there. The problem is, if you eat these, they will add up. I mean, a little bit is going to add up to possibly a lot of trans fats. If you eat a lot of fast foods, you eat a lot of processed foods. So even though it says 0, if you should read the label and look for partially hydrogenated oils, and then make a purchasing decision based on that. So anyway, a lot of times just a consumer kind of issue. If you see partially hydrogenated cottonseed, flaxseed, corn, whatever, they put that on the label because depending on the price of the oil, they can switch. So if cottonseed oil is lower in cost than corn oil, they'll be using cottonseed oil. But if corn oil then gets lower than cottonseed, they can use corn oil. So they put them all on there just because then they can use any one of those. It doesn't mean that they have all three in them. It just means whatever's cheaper they're going to use, just for your interest. Healthy cell membranes, again, this is just an indicator of what monounsaturated, these would be the healthy ones, because your body's going to use what you give it. If you give it saturated fatty acids, it's going to make phospholipids using saturated fatty acids. If you give it mono or poly, it's going to use those. If you give it trans, it's going to use those. So it's going to use what you have and what you give it. So if you give it good fats, then it's going to be very permeable. This has a relationship to diabetes, by the way. We haven't talked about that yet, but we will. But it allows, it reduces insulin resistance, actually, if you use fatty acids. But if you do have, incurred saturated fats or trans fats, those kinds of things, they can change the structure of the cell membrane and actually make it less permeable or more of a barrier kind of a thing. So you could have possibly some insulin resistance based on that. So a lot of problems with oxidation, trans fatty acids, that kind of thing. But if you get a lot of deep fat fried foods, you're getting both of them. I'm just trying to make that clear. So that's the triglycerides. The other two structures, and we'll talk a lot about cholesterol later when we get into heart disease, but here phospholipids are basically just a phosphorus choline group with two fatty acids, very similar to triglyceride. Cholesterol, not even close to the structure, but it is a lipid. The reason they're called lipids because one of the reasons they're not soluble in water, kind of a thing, and so they're kind of a greasy thing. But so we'll talk a lot about cholesterol later when we get into heart disease. But just to kind of finalize this, the bottom line is, we talked about antioxidants, but there is no supporting evidence that taking supplements of antioxidants actually work. Because one of the reasons is, and let me give you the second point, is that you should be getting your antioxidants from real food. There is something called synergism. And synergism basically means that nutrients are in foods because they work together. And the idea of eating nutrients from foods is that you're going to be eating nutrients that are used to working together. And so synergism means the ability of two or more things to work together for a bigger benefit than they would give by themselves. So if you're taking vitamin C as a supplement by itself, it's not as good as if you ate an orange that has vitamin C and other chemicals in it. We're going to call those phytochemicals that actually help vitamin C to be absorbed and to be utilized in things. So there is some synergism in there. So the idea is you shouldn't really take supplements on their own, like just vitamin C or just something else. You should actually try your best to get them in food where they're in the food that they are naturally in, because there's other things in there that will help them and benefit their utilization. And then you're going to get most of your antioxidants from a high colored kind of food. So fruits and vegetables that have a lot of color to them. Potatoes are good, but things like red peppers and orange peppers and red tomatoes and orange carrots and dark green leafies and those kind of things are going to be the best for getting your antioxidants and things. And then you want a wide selection. We kind of harped on that at the very beginning, that you can't just get all of your antioxidants by eating a carrot. Carrots have some antioxidants, but broccoli would have different ones. And so as we talked about, there's different kinds of reactive oxygen species. There's different kinds of free radicals. You need different kinds of antioxidants to work on this. One antioxidant doesn't work on all reactive oxygen species because they're different structure. So you need to get a diversity of antioxidants to work on the diversity of reactive oxygen species and free radicals. It's just as simple as that. Consume minimally processed foods. Processed foods are going to have the increased oxidation potential and trans fatty acids. So you need to reduce as much as you can processed foods. Okay. So in final, you can see this duck is, yeah, it's kind of an interesting picture, but as far as I'm concerned, it's very similar to an Oregon duck. I'm saying it's an Oregon duck that would do something like that. You would never, ever find a beaver doing something like this. All right? All right, so until next time when we talk about proteins, have a good day, and we'll talk to you later.